Welcome to the channel, where powerful stories come to life. Today's tale is one you won't forget: a moment of silence, a hidden symbol, and a courtroom twist no one saw coming. But before we dive in, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you enjoy true stories that challenge assumptions and reveal deeper truths, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Because tomorrow, we're bringing you another unforgettable Royal Guard story. Let's get into it. A judge tried to ruin a soldier's career over a necklace. He regretted it instantly. The morning sun stretched over the grand courtyard of Buckingham Palace, casting crisp shadows along the cobblestones. Judge William Prescott, a 62-year-old federal judge from Boston, moved through the crowd with a dignified air, his tailored navy coat buttoned neatly over a vest and tie. Unlike the eager tourists around him, snapping photos and whispering in excitement, Judge Prescott walked slowly, with the calm, commanding presence of a man used to controlling a courtroom. He wasn't there for sightseeing. He was there for structure, for the display of order, tradition, and unwavering discipline that reminded him of the law. The changing of the guard had just concluded. Now, a fresh set of soldiers stood motionless in front of the palace, their posture impeccable. One guard in particular caught Prescott's attention, not for his stance or his movements, which were flawless, but for something else, something subtle. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly behind gold-rimmed glasses. He had spent decades detecting inconsistencies in witness statements, contradictions in evidence, and now that same instinct flared to life. Prescott slowly circled the edge of the courtyard, pretending to admire the palace architecture, though his focus remained fixed. Then he saw it, a faint silver glint at the neck of one guard. The man's uniform was pristine: scarlet tunic, white gloves, ceremonial boots, but tucked just beneath the collar, barely visible in the sunlight, was a small silver cross. Prescott froze. His mind raced, not just with questions of military dress code, but with personal memories he had long buried. His mother's illness, her desperate prayers, her silver cross, the grief that hardened into rejection of faith. Now standing before him was a soldier, an American, no less, displaying a symbol Prescott had spent years trying to forget. "This can't be regulation," he muttered, tension rising. The military, especially in ceremonial roles, had strict rules about uniform neutrality. Personal beliefs were to be kept private. This, in his mind, was a violation, a challenge to the very traditions he respected. Straightening his tie, Prescott stepped forward. He didn't know yet who this guard was. But one thing was clear: this wouldn't end at the gates of Buckingham Palace. He would see this man in court. The next morning, a light drizzle swept across Westminster as the city came to life. Inside the courthouse, chatter echoed off marble walls as lawyers, defendants, and clerks moved through security. But today, something unusual captured everyone's attention. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. There, walking up the steps of the courthouse in full ceremonial uniform, was Captain Nathaniel Brooks, the same guard Judge William Prescott had confronted just 24 hours earlier. His scarlet tunic was crisp, his boots shined to perfection, and his iconic bearskin hat stood tall against the gray sky. He wasn't just showing up, he was making a statement. No lawyer by his side, no entourage, just him. Silent, purposeful. Inside the courtroom, the gallery filled quickly. Word had spread fast. Journalists, curious locals, even a few military veterans took their seats, unsure what kind of case this was, but certain it would be worth witnessing. Judge Prescott entered shortly after, robes flowing behind him. He looked composed, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed his surprise at the crowd and at Brooks's bold appearance. "Captain Brooks," Prescott began, settling behind the bench, "I see you've elected to represent yourself." "Yes, Your Honor," Brooks replied firmly, voice clear, confident. "That is correct." The judge's brow lifted slightly. "Very well. Let the record show the defendant has declined legal counsel despite the court's advice." The tension was thick. Prescott believed he had the upper hand, a uniform violation, a clear breach of military protocol. To him, it was an open and shut case. But as Brooks took his place at the defense table, standing perfectly still in that unmistakable red uniform, something shifted in the room. Prescott adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice steady. Captain Brooks, you are charged with the unauthorized display of religious symbolism while in active ceremonial duty, specifically the wearing of a silver cross beneath your uniform. This court will determine whether your actions were in violation of military regulation, and if so, what consequences are appropriate. The courtroom went quiet. All eyes turned to Brooks. Whatever came next, it was clear this wouldn't be a routine hearing. And Judge Prescott was about to realize this case wasn't as simple as it seemed. Captain Nathaniel Brooks took a single step forward, the leather of his boots echoing softly across the polished courtroom floor. His posture remained perfect, military straight. But the moment he opened his mouth, the room shifted. "Before I address the charges, Your Honor," he said calmly, "I need to correct the record." Judge Prescott raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting what came next. "I am not only Captain Nathaniel Brooks of the U.S. Honor Guard," Brooks continued, his voice firm but respectful. "I am also a licensed attorney, Harvard Law, class of 2014. I served 6 years as a JAG officer before requesting my current ceremonial assignment." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Several spectators exchanged stunned looks. Prescott, caught off guard, blinked, momentarily losing his rhythm. Brooks didn't flinch. "My military record includes legal advisement on multiple international deployments. I've argued before tribunals, drafted regulation updates, and enforced uniform policy firsthand. So with all due respect, sir, I understand this subject better than most." Prescott recovered quickly, but the shift in tone was impossible to ignore. "Very well," he said, his voice clipped. "Proceed with your defense." Brooks nodded. "Regarding the Silver Cross in question, it is in fact approved under Military Regulation 15C-7, subsection 3. It allows the display of minimal religious symbols if they do not interfere with duties or uniform integrity. My request was submitted and approved 3 years ago, signed by my commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Thompson." He pulled a neatly folded document from his coat and handed it to the court clerk. The judge skimmed it, his expression hard to read, but the lines of confidence on his face had begun to soften. Brooks continued, "The cross belonged to my grandfather. He wore it when he landed on the beaches of Normandy. He never took it off, even under fire. I wear it not just for my faith, but to honor his memory and sacrifice." The room remained silent, every word hanging heavy in the air. Judge Prescott leaned back slightly, for the first time looking unsure. The charges, once so simple, now felt like a puzzle unraveling in his hands. And Brooks, once seen as just a silent guard, was clearly much more than he appeared to be. Just as the courtroom began to settle, the back doors creaked open. Every head turned. A tall woman in full military dress uniform strode down the aisle with calm authority. Her chest bore rows of ribbons, her expression steady. Judge Prescott squinted, instantly recognizing her from official briefings. "Colonel Sarah Thompson, commanding officer of the U.S. Honor Guard," she announced, her voice carrying through the chamber like a command on the parade ground. "Your Honor, if permitted, I'd like to offer testimony directly related to this case." Prescott hesitated. This wasn't standard procedure, and he wasn't fond of surprises. But denying a commanding officer would only look worse in front of a packed gallery. He gave a tight nod. "Proceed, Colonel." Colonel Thompson stepped forward and handed the judge a formal folder. "This is Captain Brooks' approved religious accommodation, processed through military legal channels 3 years ago. The cross he wears meets all regulation standards, non-visible during duty, non-disruptive, and of deeply personal significance. The approval included theological consultation and historical review, and is in compliance with Department of Defense Directive 1300.17. She looked directly at the judge. This was not a symbolic protest or rule-breaking. This was a soldier honoring faith, family, and military values, all within legal parameters. Prescott flipped through the documents, his confidence visibly unraveling. Brooks stood silently beside his commander, every inch the professional. The gallery, packed with veterans and spectators, watched in stunned silence. One elderly veteran in the front row gave a slow nod, tapping his blazer pocket, where a small cross likely rested beneath his medals. Colonel Thompson continued, "Sir, I must also address jurisdiction. This court has no legal authority over active duty military uniform matters. That responsibility falls squarely within the armed forces chain of command." Prescott stiffened. The line he thought he had drawn so clearly was now blurring beneath the weight of military law and tradition. The authority he'd wielded just minutes earlier now felt like a formality. Captain Brooks remained expressionless, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about a cross. It was about something much bigger, about respect, legacy, and the limits of judgment. Judge Prescott sat motionless, hands folded tightly on the bench, as the weight of everything he'd just heard sank in. The legal foundation he believed was solid had been dismantled in under 20 minutes by a soldier he thought would stand silently and obey. Captain Brooks hadn't just shown up. He had defended himself with precision, humility, and undeniable truth. Colonel Thompson's testimony had been the final nail, backed by irrefutable documentation and military authority. The courtroom remained silent, heavy with anticipation. Prescott cleared his throat, though his voice lacked the commanding tone it had carried earlier. "It appears," he began slowly, "that this court has misinterpreted both the jurisdiction and the regulations in this matter." He paused, adjusting his robe like a man trying to reassemble his dignity. "In light of the evidence presented and the military's direct confirmation of proper procedure, this court must acknowledge it has overstepped." A hush fell over the gallery. Then, with noticeably less force than usual, Prescott brought down the gavel. "All charges against Captain Nathaniel Brooks are hereby dismissed." Brooks didn't move. He simply stood tall, steady, the weight of the moment reflected in his posture. But before Prescott could retreat to his chambers, Brooks stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "if I may add one last request for the record." Prescott paused, not eager to hear more, but nodded. "I ask that the court acknowledge publicly that the accusation against me was not only incorrect, but rooted in personal bias," Brooks said evenly. "Because what happened yesterday, being called out in uniform in front of civilians, wasn't just about me. It sent a message to every service member who wears something meaningful beneath their uniform." The judge exhaled slowly. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, with a reluctant nod, he replied, "You're right, Captain. This court was guided by assumption rather than fact. Let the record show that Captain Brooks acted within full compliance of military regulations and with integrity." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Veterans nodded. A few civilians clapped softly. Brooks gave one respectful nod, then turned and exited the courtroom, his cross still quietly tucked beneath his uniform, exactly where it belonged. Now that you've heard Captain Brooks' incredible story, we'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in that courtroom? Do you believe Judge Prescott's actions were driven by a sense of duty or by personal bias? Have you ever misjudged someone based on what you saw, only to learn there was a deeper story behind it? This case challenges all of us to think about how we balance tradition, law, and personal belief. Should someone be punished for quietly honoring their family and faith, especially when they're following the rules? Or do we, as a society, sometimes forget to look beyond appearances? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whether you're watching from the US, the UK, or anywhere in the world, we want to hear your perspective. What does this story mean to you? Have you ever stood up for something you believed in, even when the odds were against you? Let's turn the comment section into a real conversation, because stories like this don't just belong in courtrooms, they belong in all of our lives. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we're back with another powerful story from behind the red tunic.